Hi, I'm Bobby. I'm a 25-year-old man working as a junior project manager in construction. And recently, my life has taken a bit of a turn. I spent the first 4 years of my life in the care system, but fortunately, my memories of this time are sparse, and there's been no lasting trauma. From what I've been told, the home where I spent my earliest years is well regarded for the care it provides to children. At the age of 4, I was taken in by the Roberts, a husband and wife who would take presents to the children's home every Christmas, a tradition they continue today. By the time I was 5, they had officially adopted me. From here on, they'll be referred to as Mom and Dad. According to my mother, they both fell in love with this shy little boy who sat in the corner on Christmas Day, while the other children couldn't contain their excitement, tearing into every box and package they could. By New Year's Eve, I was living with them. From then on, I experienced a completely normal upper-middle-class upbringing. I grew up in Cardiff, where Mam owned a chain of salons around South Wales, and Dad wore a suit to work every day. I was blessed with 2 wonderful older sisters, Claire and Sally, who completely doted on me. They took me everywhere they could, and thanks to an extended family who also showered me with love, I always felt like I belonged. The only aspect of my upbringing that might differ from the norm is my sisters and I all attended private school, a day school, because Mam couldn't bear the thought of being away from us, but a private school nonetheless. My dad always said that you can't put a price on education, but he and my mother did a fantastic job of keeping us grounded. They both came from tough working class backgrounds and taught us to appreciate everything we had and to work for any luxuries we wanted. Another way they kept us grounded was by getting us into boxing from as early as I can remember. You see, my dad and his best friend, Jason, or Mr. James as I was taught to address him, both funded a small boxing gym in the Ely area of Cardiff, where they grew up and trained together as kids. This is what led to them forming a friendship that has lasted over 50 years. I loved it. I did well as an amateur, and at 18, I represented Wales at the Commonwealth Games as a heavyweight, winning a bronze medal. I thought about turning pro after the games, but my dad talked me out of it, stressing the importance of putting my education first, and that he'd have no issues supporting my career as long as I finished a university degree first. I didn't end up following that dream. My priorities changed after university. And sparring with the boys at the gym is enough to get my fix for now. The old man and Mr. James are inseparable, and so are my mother and Mrs. James. So you can imagine their excitement when their daughter Chloe and I announced that we were together. Due to the closeness of our parents, we spent a lot of time together growing up, and I can't deny that I always had a soft spot for Chloe, which often manifested through childish teasing. Well, one day, Chloe and I were at the gym. I would have been 15 at this point, and she'd had enough of my wind-ups and demanded that we get in the ring. I agreed, saying that I'd keep my hands behind my back, and if she could land a punch within a minute, I'd stop the teasing. If she couldn't, she'd let me take her out. Well, I danced around for 60 seconds without her laying a hand on me, but as the timer rang to signal that a minute was up, she landed a right hook that Mike Tyson would have been proud of. Nose bleeding and pride hurting, I got to my feet. She approached, wiped the blood away, and then kissed me softly on the lips. 10 years later, we've been married for 3 years and have twins, Seren and Lou. I love her with all my heart, so yeah, a pretty normal upbringing. But here's the not so normal part. During the conversation with my dad about going pro as a boxer, he revealed to me why he really wanted me to focus on my education and what he really does for work. Growing up in a working class family in Ely, opportunities to succeed at the time were few and far between. Due to their backgrounds as boxers, Dad and Jason were recruited by some older gentlemen involved with the local nightlife to work as bouncers in the city center. From there, they were introduced to people working within organized crime who soon took them on as enforcers. Dad and Jason moved up the ranks to where they now have their own syndicate working around the South Wales area. He didn't go into any further detail, but he shared that this was something he'd always waited until his kids were 18 to tell them. He's still Dad. I don't see him any differently, but obviously it was a shock to find out at the time. Now to the reason I need to vent. Last Friday, I came home to absolute silence. No toddlers running around my feet, no music, no TV, just silence. I walked up the stairs and approached the bedroom where I could hear muffled sobs. I opened the door to find Chloe crying into her pillow. I called her name and she looked up, her eyes red and soaked from crying. I asked what was wrong, but before I could say another word, she hit me with one of those right hooks she'd caught me with 10 years ago. She began screaming at me, telling me she saw me, that I knew what I did. I managed to calm her down and asked her to explain what she meant. She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture of me and another woman sitting at a table at a cafe in town, then another of me kissing said woman. I was dumbfounded. The man in the picture was identical to me, my complete double in every feature. I was dumbfounded but managed to log on to the CCTV from my work, which clearly showed I was on site all day. Chloe apologized for hitting me, but honestly I couldn't blame her. I'd have been absolutely crushed if I were in her position, and fair play to her, she still got it. We racked our brains for a while on who that man could be. Chloe eventually looked at me and said, "Bobs, you're adopted. What if you have a twin? We've got twins, and they can be hereditary." Honestly, that question has sat with me ever since. I've always had such a great relationship with my family that I've never put much thought into my biological parents or any possible siblings. For the first time in my life, I feel slightly lost. For the first time in my life, not knowing where I came from really bothered me. I guess I felt a bit empty. There was a deep feeling of guilt too. My parents, my sisters, and all my extended family gave me such a wonderful life growing up. Was I disrespecting them by wanting to find out where I came from? I think about my parents and how often they remind me how proud they are to have me as a son. Am I letting them down? My mood shifted pretty quickly when Chloe and the kids came through the door. They'd brought my sisters Claire and Sally along with them. They sat me down, claiming they could tell I wasn't myself, and that Chloe had let them know I was having some of the feelings I'd already mentioned. Claire looked me in the eye the same way Dad does, and basically laid it out that I don't just owe it to myself to find out about my biological background, but to the kids as well, to know of any health conditions that could affect them as they get older. The biggest takeaway I had from that conversation was that, regardless, I'd always be their baby brother. My parents, thankfully, mirrored those words when I spoke to them later that evening. Ma'am was quite emotional and held on to me for a while, touched that the biggest reason for me not looking for my birth givers was how it would affect their feelings. Dad just gave me that clap on the shoulder and said, no matter what, I'm their son. Luckily, my boss was understanding and gave me some time off. On Monday, my first port of call was to contact the adoption agency. There was no record of my existence before my time in the children's home, which stung, but I was determined to carry on. We contacted the children's home to see if there were any records of my time there. There were, and we arranged for me to go and collect a copy the following day. From what I could see from the records, I'd been there for a week, but no record of who my parents were. Unfortunately for me, there was no one from my time at the home still working there. However, they were able to put me in touch with Julie, who was the manager of the home when I was there. I spoke to her over the phone, and she agreed to meet me on the following Saturday morning to chat. That was this morning. I met Julie at a coffee shop in town. She was a sweet, older lady, with a warmth that felt so familiar. She approached me, placed her hand on my cheek, and said, "Baby Bobby, you've grown so much." She sat down opposite me with a smile. "Do you remember me?" I asked. She replied, "Of course I do. I named you, sweetheart. I know you're here to find out about your birth parents, but I'm sorry to say that we never knew who they were. You turned up on the doorstep of the home in a Moses basket, covered in blankets with a handwritten note that read, the 11th of December, 1999. You were so tiny. We concluded that it was your birthday. You'd have been a week old. We tried for the years you were with us to locate who left you. We even got the police involved, but we always came up short. Then when you were 4, the Roberts took you in. Every year they'd come at Christmas. You could see that you just melted their hearts, and that last year you were with us, they were completely in love with you. There was no keeping them from you. They were offered the chance to foster you, but I remember your mother just saying, "No, that's my son." Your parents would update me on how you were doing every year when they came to give presents to the kids. It brought me so much joy to know that the timid little boy we once had was becoming a strong young man. I left the conversation with Julie with a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I felt grateful. and lucky to be taken into a family that really loved me. On the other, I felt worthless. Was that all I really was to the people who gave birth to me? No name, just a Moses basket and a date of birth. I never needed them, and I certainly don't know. 6 months later, things had just slipped back into normality, and somehow I'd forgotten about the whole situation. That was until I received a call from my father last week. Just a quick FYI about the old man. As much as my sisters and I are aware of what he does, he's always kept us away from it all. To the outside world, he and Mr. James are business partners who own a few restaurants and shops. My mother won't let him anywhere near the salons. To Dad, it was always, I do this so you don't have to, which is why the call was such a shock. It was a Saturday evening. Chloe had gone out to dinner with my sisters, and I had just put the kids to bed. I answered the old man's call. He spoke and didn't let me reply. Your mother's on her way to look after the kids. When she arrives, you get straight into the car and come to the pottery in town. No questions. They'll be answered when you get here. So I did what he said. Ma'am arrived, and I got straight into the car and headed to the pottery, one of the restaurants Dad and Mr. James own. The old man was waiting for me at the door and had one of his employees park my car. He let me know that he'd been called to the restaurant because a customer had been disrespectful to one of the waitresses and had made a scene when they tried to remove him. The reason Dad and Mr. James were called? The staff thought the customer was me. He opened the door to the back. We headed to the office, and there he was, the man from the picture, sat surrounded by a few of Mr. James's and the old man's employees, seemingly too scared to move. It was like looking into the mirror. He looked at me, and the fear left his face, replaced by a look of absolute shock. I spoke. Me. What's your date of birth? Him. What? Me. What's your date of birth? You heard me the first time. Him. It's the 11th of December, 1999. Me. Who are you? Why are you here? Him. My name's Andy. I travel for work. I get sent all over the country. I'm a sales rep for my dad's company. What's going on? Who are you? Jesus, we look alike. Me. Were you adopted? Fostered? Or ever in care? Where did you grow up? Him. No, I grew up in a small village in the Cotswolds with my parents and sister. Who are you? Why am I here? Me. I think we might be brothers. We've got the same birth date. We're identical in every way. How long are you in town for? Him. Brothers? Don't be stupid, it's just a coincidence. I'm going home tomorrow. I'll be back here in 2 weeks. Me. Okay, look, whether you like it or not, we're going to be doing a DNA test to prove it. Don't breathe a word of this to anyone. I'll take your number. Come to my house tomorrow to do the test, and I'll send it off. I'll text you the address in the morning. If I get the results back before you're here next, I'll call you. Again, don't tell a soul. And lastly, if you come to one of our restaurants again, you show some respect. The old man was pleased with how I handled the situation. I think he's starting to notice that he's rubbed off on me over the years. Anyway, the results came back today, and as I suspected, it was a match. I'm about to call him, and if what he says is true about not being adopted, I'll be paying Mommy and Daddy a little visit.